If you've ever had someone look you dead in the eye and say, "I don't feel safe with you," while you're literally holding a grocery bag and asking if they want chicken or pasta for dinner, congratulations. You've met the modern marriage buzzword Olympics. The night my wife started calling me emotionally unsafe, I was wearing my oldest hoodie, standing in our kitchen, and trying to decide whether the jar of pasta sauce in my hand was still good. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't blocking the doorway. I wasn't doing the whole movie villain thing where you loom and whisper threats. I was doing what I always do after work, existing in my own house, asking a normal question, and hoping the dog didn't throw up on the rug again. Susan said it like she'd rehearsed it in the car. Calm voice, slightly tilted head, eyes steady. Like she'd watched a 10-second clip titled, "How to Shut Down a Narcissist," and decided to speedrun the whole script. "Patrick, I need you to stop. You're making me feel unsafe." I blinked. Twice. I looked behind me, half expecting to see a guy with a camera crew and a boom mic. You know, like I'd been pranked by the universe. Unsafe. How? I asked genuinely. Because of the sauce? That's minimizing, she said immediately. No hesitation. Like a reflex. Like the phrase came out of a vending machine. Now, I'm not one of those guys who thinks feelings are fake or therapy is a scam. I've been to therapy. I've recommended therapy. I've sat in a beige office and talked about my childhood, like I was confessing to a priest who charges by the hour. I'm not allergic to emotional language, but that sentence didn't feel like my wife speaking. It felt like someone had slid a laminated cue card into her hands. And the weird part? Susan wasn't always like this. We're not some toxic couple that's been screaming into the void for 10 years. We've been married 7 years, no kids, mortgage, dog, 2 cars, and a shared Amazon account that knows too much. Our biggest fight last year was about whether a $400 espresso machine was an investment, or "Patrick, you're becoming your father." Susan can be intense, sure. She's smart, funny, and stubborn in the way that makes you respect her even when she's wrong. But she used to argue like a person. She used to say things like, "That hurt my feelings," or "I feel like you're not hearing me." Normal human stuff. Then, somewhere in the last couple of months, her vocabulary shifted. It wasn't one big moment. It was like a software update that happened overnight while I slept. She started using these phrases that didn't sound like her voice. "My nervous system is dysregulated." "I'm holding space for myself." "Your tone is controlling." "You're weaponizing incompetence." The first time she said weaponizing incompetence, I laughed. Not because I wanted to be cruel, because it sounded so ridiculous in context. I had asked her where we keep the extra light bulbs. Apparently, that meant I was an abuser. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. At first, I chalked it up to stress. Susan's job had been hectic. She works in marketing for a healthcare company, which is basically adult daycare for executives who panic when a font changes. She'd been working late, joining calls with a tight smile, and scrolling her phone like it owed her money. And then there were her friends. I'm going to be careful here, because Reddit loves to turn this into a "women are bad" thing. That's not what this is. This is specifically about Susan's group chat. The one I didn't know existed until it basically walked into my house wearing highlighter-colored lipstick and a moral superiority complex. Susan has 3 close friends she sees regularly: Megan, Tasha, and Brielle. They're all the kind of women who can turn a brunch table into a TED Talk about boundaries. They have strong opinions on everything. Astrology, microplastics, attachment styles, you name it. They're not evil. They just move as a unit, like a little school of fish that feeds on validation and espresso. Megan is married and talks about her husband like he's a golden retriever that she's trying to train out of barking. Tasha is newly divorced and treats it like she escaped a cult. Brielle isn't married, but she has a rotating cast of emotionally unavailable men that she diagnoses like she's a psychiatrist with a TikTok account. Susan loves them. They hype her up. They make her laugh. They also, how do I put this gently, treat relationships like a competitive sport where someone has to lose. I didn't think much of it for years. You tolerate the friend group, you make small talk, You smile through conversations about trauma responses while eating chips and salsa. That's marriage. You marry a person, you inherit the people who will say, "We don't like him for you," after watching him mispronounce quinoa once. But then it escalated. Slowly, and then all at once. It's hard to explain how disorienting it feels when you can tell your partner is looking at you through someone else's lens. Like you're standing right there, but she's reading a review of you written by a committee. One night, Susan got home from girls' night and immediately started reorganizing our living room. Not cleaning, reorganizing, moving furniture with a quiet rage like she'd been possessed by Joanna Gaines. "What's happening?" I asked. "I'm reclaiming my space," she said, breathless. "I've been feeling like I don't have autonomy in this house. Reader, I swear on my dog's life, I have never once told Susan where to put a couch. I don't care. She could put the couch on the ceiling and I'd say, 'Cool, do you want me to hand you the drill?' But she said, 'autonomy,' like she was testifying in court. I should have noticed the pattern earlier. The therapy language wasn't random. It always showed up after she spent time with them. She'd come home with a new phrase and a new grievance, like her friends were handing her a bag of emotional ammunition. At first, I did what any normal husband does. I tried to talk it out. I asked questions. I listened. I apologized when I actually messed up. I changed small habits. I started texting when I was running late. I started taking on more chores without being asked. I even watched a few of those healthy relationship videos because I thought, okay, maybe I'm missing something. But the more I tried to meet her in the middle, the more the middle moved. The goalposts didn't just shift. They packed up, got in an Uber, and relocated to a different zip code. Every conversation started to feel like a trap. If I defended myself, I was invalidating. If I stayed quiet, I was stonewalling. If I tried to solve the problem, I was controlling. If I asked for clarification, I was playing dumb. It was like being in a game where every answer is wrong and the rules are secret. And here's the part that really messed with my head. Susan wasn't screaming or threatening. She wasn't throwing plates. She was calm, clinical, polite even, like she'd learned how to weaponize politeness. The first time she told me I was gaslighting her, it was because I said I didn't remember a conversation we'd supposedly had about a vacation budget. That was it. She said I was trying to rewrite reality. I remember thinking, is this what it feels like to be accused of a crime you didn't commit while everyone keeps nodding? So yeah, that was the vibe. If this story ended with me saying, "Then I found out she was cheating," I know exactly how Reddit would react. But no, this wasn't about another guy. This was about something weirder and honestly, scarier. Susan was outsourcing her perception of our marriage to 3 friends and a handful of viral therapy clips. And I didn't realize how deep it went until the night I heard them say the word. Abuser. Not in a dramatic fight, not in a heated argument, not in a, "he hit you, you need to leave," kind of way. In a casual conversational tone, like they were labeling a container in the pantry. That's the night I stopped trying to win arguments and started paying attention. The night I heard the word abuser, I wasn't supposed to be home. A friend of mine had an extra ticket to a basketball game downtown. Nothing fancy, midweek, decent seats, overpriced beer. The kind of night where you yell at grown men for missing free throws and forget about your mortgage for a few hours. I told Susan I'd be out late. She said, "Have fun," in that polite, emotionally neutral way that had become her default setting. 15 minutes into my drive, my phone buzzed. Game canceled. Some last-minute scheduling mess. My friend apologized, promised we'd reschedule, and that was that. I sat in my car for a second, staring at the steering wheel, debating whether to just drive around for a while so I wouldn't ruin whatever Susan had planned. I wish I'd kept driving. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed 3 cars already there. Megan's white SUV, Tasha's beat-up sedan, Brielle's little hybrid that somehow always looked judgmental. Girls' night. Of course, I didn't text. I didn't announce myself. I grabbed my jacket and walked in quietly. The way you do when you don't want to interrupt a moment. The living room lights were on. Laughter floated down the hallway, that high-pitched conspiratorial kind that always seems to spike when someone's being discussed. I was halfway down the hall when I heard my name. Not shouted, not whispered. Just inserted into the conversation like an item on a list. "I'm telling you," Megan said. "That's classic." "Exactly," Tasha replied. "They always do it subtly. That's how you know." Susan laughed, a small, uncomfortable laugh. "I mean, I don't know if I'd go that far." There it was, the pause before a diagnosis. "You don't have to call it abuse out loud for it to be abuse," Brielle said. "But Patrick? Yeah, he checks a lot of boxes." I stopped walking. I stood there in the hallway, jacket still on, keys in my hand, listening to four women dissect my character like I was a frog in high school biology. "What boxes?" Susan asked. "He controls the emotional temperature," Megan said. "You always adjust yourself to keep the peace. That's a power imbalance." "He plays the nice guy," Tasha added. "That's the most dangerous kind. You don't even realize you're being controlled." "And the way he asks questions," Brielle said confidently. "It's never just curiosity, it's pressure. He wants you to explain yourself until you doubt your own feelings." I almost laughed. Almost. Because if asking, "Hey, are we still good for dinner with my parents this weekend?" makes me a master manipulator, then I've severely underutilized my powers. Susan didn't defend me. She hesitated. That was worse. "I guess sometimes I do feel small," she said slowly, like she was trying the word on for size. "Like I'm always reacting to him." There was a chorus of affirmations. "Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. See?" And then Megan dropped it. Casual, clean, no drama. "That's emotional abuse, Susan. No shouting, no gasp. Just a label slapped on my existence like a post-it note." I stood there for another minute, my brain doing this weird buffering thing, like a computer trying to process a corrupted file. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt in the traditional sense. I felt studied, reduced, like I'd been turned into a concept. I didn't storm in. I didn't confront them. I backed up quietly, walked out the front door, sat in my car, and stared at the dashboard like it was going to explain what the hell had just happened. That was the moment something clicked. This wasn't a fight. This wasn't a rough patch. This was a narrative forming. And once someone decides you're the villain, everything you do becomes evidence. I went for a drive. No destination, just miles. I replayed the conversation in my head, not emotionally, but analytically. The phrases, the certainty, the way Susan had been guided to her conclusion like a witness being coached. By the time I came back, the cars were gone. Susan was on the couch, scrolling her phone, perfectly calm. "You're back early," she said. "Game got canceled," I replied. "Oh." She didn't look up. "We should talk later." There it was, the prelude. Over the next few weeks, the behavior ramped up. Subtle at first, then less so. Susan started reacting to me like I was a threat she had to manage. If I walked into a room, she'd stiffen. If I asked how her day was, she'd pause before answering, like she was checking herself for compliance. She'd say things like, "I need you to lower your energy," when I was literally sitting on the couch. Or, "You're being defensive," when I said, "I don't understand what you mean." She started setting boundaries that were just rules with better PR. Don't ask follow-up questions. Don't disagree in the moment. Don't use humor when she's expressing feelings. Don't sigh. Don't look confused. Don't exist incorrectly. One night, she told me she needed emotional distance and moved to the guest room. Not because we'd fought, because she felt activated. Activated by what? I still don't know. What I did know was this. Every reaction I gave her was being measured against a script I didn't have access to. And no matter what I did, the conclusion stayed the same. I was the problem. That's when it stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling dangerous. Because once someone believes you're abusive, your intentions no longer matter. Only interpretations do. So I stopped trying to convince her. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending. I stopped correcting. Instead, I started listening. I paid attention to the phrases she used, the timing, the way she'd escalate a minor disagreement into a statement about patterns. I noticed how she'd glance at her phone after arguments, like she was waiting for validation from the hive. And that's when the idea formed. I didn't need to fight the narrative. I needed to reflect it. I called it the mirror. If Susan wanted to speak in therapeutic language, I'd speak it too. Calmly. Precisely. If she accused me of controlling her feelings, I'd talk about how her assumptions impacted my emotional safety. If she said I was gaslighting, I'd ask her to clarify her definition and how it applied in that moment. No sarcasm, no anger, no raised voice. Just her words, turned around and handed back. The first time I tried it, her reaction told me everything. She froze. Not angry, not defensive, just confused. Like someone who expected a certain move in chess and suddenly realized they were playing a different game. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about truth. It was about control over the story. And for the first time in weeks, the story wasn't fully hers anymore. The mirror didn't start with a big speech or a dramatic moment. It started with a dishwasher. Susan had loaded it wrong. Not wrong in a life or death way. Just cups blocking the spray arm, plates stacked like they were trying to hide from water. The old Patrick would have said something casual. Hey, the cups won't get clean like that. Neutral, helpful, domestic peacekeeping. This time I didn't say anything. I watched. She noticed. Of course she did. You're hovering, she said. I hear that you feel observed, I replied calmly, without looking up from my phone. That wasn't my intention, but I want to respect your experience. The silence that followed was beautiful. She blinked. Once. Twice. Like a Windows error screen had popped up behind her eyes. That's not what I meant, she said. Can you help me understand what you did mean? I asked gently. I don't want to make assumptions. She stared at me for a second longer, then turned back to the dishwasher and slammed it shut. No explosion, no accusation, just confusion. Later that night, she brought it up again. When you talk like that, she said, arms crossed, it feels manipulative. I'm open to feedback, I said. Can you explain which part felt manipulative so I can take responsibility if needed? I swear to God, I could see the gears grinding. This was the thing about the mirror. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't mocking. It was compliant in the most unsettling way possible. I wasn't rejecting her language. I was embracing it harder than she expected. She couldn't escalate without contradicting herself. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. Susan would accuse me of something vague, then wait. Wait for me to react emotionally. When I didn't, she'd grow restless. The conflict needed fuel. Without it, it stalled. That's when I started paying attention to her phone. Before anyone jumps down my throat, I wasn't hacking into anything or installing spyware like a low-budget villain. Susan is not subtle. She leaves her phone face up on the counter. Notifications light up the screen like Times Square. And once you know what you're looking for, you can't unsee it. A message from Megan would pop up right after an argument. A voice note from Tasha during her lunch break. Brielle typing essays like she was getting paid per word. I didn't read everything. I didn't need to. The previews told me enough. Stay calm. If he mirrors you, that's actually a red flag. He's smart. Those are the hardest ones. Textbook covert abuser behavior. We had leveled up. One night, Susan left her phone on the coffee table and went to shower. A notification buzzed. I glanced. Not intentionally at first, just habit. But the words caught my eye. Smart abusers adapt, Megan had written. They don't explode. They confuse you so you doubt yourself. I sat there staring at the screen, trying not to laugh. Smart abuser. That was me now. Not just abusive, but cunning, strategic, a Bond villain with a wedding ring. I didn't confront her about it. I didn't say, "Hey, I saw your friends think I'm an evil genius." I filed it away. More data. The next time Susan accused me of controlling the narrative, I nodded. "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "I want to be mindful of how my communication impacts you. At the same time, I'm noticing that my attempts to stay calm are being interpreted as malicious. That feels confusing for me." Her jaw tightened. "See, you're doing it again." "Doing what?" I asked. "Talking circles." "I'm trying to be clear," I said. "If clarity feels like circles, maybe we're not aligned on definitions." That was when she raised her voice. Not yelled, raised. Enough to signal distress. "Why can't you just react like a normal person?" There it was. The slip. "You're right," I said. "I hear that my emotional regulation is frustrating for you." She stormed off to the bedroom and slammed the door. 10 minutes later, her phone buzzed again. I didn't even have to look. The group chat was on fire. From what I could piece together over the next few days, the friends were spiraling. Their advice wasn't working. The script was failing. Instead of crumbling, I was cooperating. And that scared them. They started escalating their language. "He's gaslighting you by being calm. He's reframing your emotions. This is what high-functioning manipulators do." Susan started parroting those phrases, but they didn't land anymore. She'd say them, then hesitate, like she was waiting for a reaction that never came. One night, after another circular conversation that went nowhere, she sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. "I feel like I'm losing my grip on reality," she said quietly. "That one almost broke me. Almost." "I'm sorry you're feeling that way," I said. "That sounds really heavy." She looked at me, eyes glossy. "You don't think this is all in my head?" "I think a lot of voices are involved right now," I replied, "and it might help to have a neutral one." She nodded slowly. Then, suddenly, like she'd reached a conclusion mid-sentence, she said, "We should see a couples therapist." I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said immediately. "I think that's a great idea." The relief on her face flickered, then vanished. "Oh," she said. "You do?" "I do," I said. "I want a space where we can talk with someone trained to help us unpack this." She stared at me like I'd just agreed too quickly to something she thought I'd fight. "I just thought you'd resist," she admitted. "Why would I?" I asked, genuinely. "If I'm doing something harmful, I want to know." She didn't answer. That was the apogee. The moment the power dynamic shifted, she wanted the therapist as leverage, as validation, as a referee who would finally blow the whistle and point at me. What she didn't expect was how eager I was to step onto the field. And as she lay back on the bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something important. The mirror had done its job. Now it was time to invite a witness. Once Susan decided we were going to couples therapy, the operation began. I could tell immediately. Her phone usage doubled. Bathroom trips got longer. She started wearing that specific expression people have when they're rehearsing conversations in their head and winning imaginary arguments with imaginary enemies. The group chat was back in full force. I didn't need to snoop aggressively to know what was happening. Notifications popped up while her phone sat on the counter like it wanted to be seen. I'd catch fragments in passing, the emotional equivalent of overhearing someone plan a coup in a Starbucks. Write everything down so you don't get derailed. Stay on message. Don't let him charm the therapist. If the therapist invalidates you, that's a red flag. Remember, calm men can still be dangerous. It was like watching a legal team prep a witness. Susan chose the therapist herself. That part mattered to her. She framed it like she was taking control, reclaiming agency, making sure we didn't end up with some old-school guy who doesn't get emotional labor. The therapist, Dr. Reynolds, turned out to be a middle-aged woman with a soft voice, neutral clothes, and the kind of face that doesn't react much to anything. No crystals, no buzzwords on the wall, just a couch, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues that had clearly seen some things. Susan went in confident, chin up, notes on her phone. I went in curious. The first session started exactly how Susan wanted it to. She spoke first, about feeling small, about walking on eggshells, about how my calmness felt performative. She used all the right terms smoothly, like she'd practiced. I listened. I nodded. I didn't interrupt. When it was my turn, I didn't counterattack. I didn't say, "That's not true." I didn't bring up the group chat or the word abuser or any of it. I talked about confusion. I talked about how suddenly everything I did had a hidden meaning attached to it. How my attempts to communicate were interpreted as tactics. How it felt to be diagnosed instead of understood. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward slightly, asked clarifying questions, asked Susan what she meant by certain terms. That's when the cracks appeared. Susan would say, "He's controlling the emotional environment," and the therapist would ask, "Can you give a specific example?" Susan would pause. The example would shrink. The certainty would wobble. At one point, Dr. Reynolds said gently, "It sounds like Patrick is regulating himself, not you." Susan's face tightened. "That doesn't mean it's healthy," she said quickly. "Not inherently," the therapist replied. "In fact, emotional regulation is usually a strength. The question is whether there's coercion." There wasn't. By the end of the session, something unexpected had happened. I hadn't been validated as a hero. Susan hadn't been labeled as wrong. But the narrative had shifted. Subtly. Powerfully. Susan left quieter than she arrived. In the car, she stared out the window. I didn't push. I didn't summarize. I let the silence do its thing. That night, the group chat went nuclear. I didn't see the messages directly, but the emotional aftershocks were impossible to miss. Susan paced. She reread things on her phone. She sighed a lot. At one point, she muttered, "I don't think that therapist really understands trauma." The next day, Megan came over, just to check in. Tasha called. Brielle sent a voice note that lasted 3 minutes. The consensus was clear. The therapist was compromised. "She's siding with him." That's how they do it. "You felt invalidated because you were invalidated." Susan repeated these lines out loud like affirmations she wasn't sure she believed, but she still went to the second session. That surprised everyone, including me. The second session was different. Susan wasn't as sharp, less scripted. She hesitated more. When Dr. Reynolds asked where certain ideas came from, Susan admitted she'd been talking to her friends a lot. The therapist didn't criticize the friends. She didn't say they were wrong. She just asked a simple question. "How has that been working for you?" Susan didn't answer right away. For the first time in weeks, she spoke without borrowing language. "I feel overwhelmed," she said. "Like I don't know which thoughts are mine anymore." That was the moment I saw her come back a little. Not fully, not magically healed, but present. After that session, something softened. Susan laughed more. She touched my arm again when she talked. She stopped flinching when I entered a room. It wasn't a return to normal, but it was a ceasefire. The friends hated it. They started suggesting a new therapist, a trauma-informed one, a female-led practice, someone who would see through my tactics. Susan didn't commit. She listened. She nodded. But she didn't immediately obey. That's when I understood the real problem. This wasn't about me versus Susan. This was about Susan being surrounded by people who were deeply unhappy in their own lives and had turned that unhappiness into a belief system. A system where someone always had to be at fault, where relationships were battles, where men were either oppressors or projects. And Susan, smart and empathetic and open, had absorbed it like a sponge. I loved her. I still do. And I knew she loved her friends. Cutting them off wasn't an option. Ultimatums never work. Forcing clarity never sticks. But I also knew something else. If I wanted our marriage to survive, I couldn't just out-argue the influence. I had to expose it. Gently, strategically, with humor, not hostility. I had an idea, a very good one. And if it worked, no one would have to choose sides. I didn't launch my plan with confrontation. I launched it with flowers. Real ones. Big, unapologetic bouquet. Not the sad grocery store kind you grab while buying milk, but the kind that makes the delivery guy double-check the address like, "You sure this is for this apartment?" Along with the flowers, I gave Susan a small box. Inside was a bracelet she'd pointed at months ago and then dismissed with, "It's stupid, I don't need it." Which, in marriage language, means she absolutely wanted it and hoped I remembered. "I just wanted to do something nice," I said. "No agenda. I think we've both been under a lot of pressure, and I want our home to feel good again." She softened immediately. Shoulders dropped, smile returned. The version of Susan I fell in love with peeked out like a cat deciding whether it's safe to leave the room. Later that evening, while she was still in that warm, receptive headspace, I floated the idea. "What if we had people over next weekend?" I said casually. "Like a real get-together. Food, drinks, no drama, just connection." She raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Your friends," I said. "If you want. Megan, Tasha, Brielle, whoever." She hesitated, clearly scanning for traps. I let the silence breathe. "I'd handle everything," I added. "Planning, food, setup. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. I just want to do something nice for you." That did it. She agreed. When Susan told the group chat, the response wasn't excitement. It was suspicion. I didn't see the messages directly, but I heard about them in fragments later. One of them asked why I was suddenly being so generous. Another joked, half-joked, that this was how some viral Reddit story started. You know the ones. Husband invites everyone over, smiles politely, then announces the divorce like he's reading a weather report. Apparently, I was now capable of psychological flash mobs. Susan defended me, but without much conviction. "He just wants to do something nice," she said. Which, to the group, sounded exactly like what a woman says before being publicly humiliated. But the party stayed on. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just a party. This was a symposium. I went all in. I found 2 licensed therapists and a relationship coach who specialized in communication and conflict. Not influencers, not TikTok gurus, but actual professionals who taught workshops and seminars. People who charged real money and had real credentials. It cost me a ridiculous amount. The kind of amount you hesitate over, stare at your banking app, then remind yourself that divorce costs more. My logic was simple. Susan's friends love psychology, or at least the aesthetic of it. So I decided to give them the real thing. No slogans, no buzzwords, just depth. The night of the event, the house looked unrecognizable. Catered food lined the counters. Wine and non-alcoholic options were arranged like I'd watched one too many hosting videos. Chairs were set up neatly in the living room, facing a small presentation area. When Susan walked in and saw it, her mouth actually fell open. "What is all this?" she asked. "A night you don't have to manage," I said. "Just enjoy." When her friends arrived, the shock doubled. They were dressed for wine and gossip. They walked into what looked like a TED Talk meets dinner party. Their eyes darted around. Confusion, suspicion, awe. Then the speakers arrived. You could practically hear the mental record scratch. Once the evening started, something unexpected happened. People leaned in. The talks were engaging, funny, grounded. They broke down concepts without blame. They analyzed scenes from movies, viral clips, common relationship myths. They talked about how therapy language gets distorted online, how labels can help or harm. When the Q&A began, the room lit up. Megan asked about resentment in marriage. Tasha asked about projection after divorce. Brielle asked about attachment styles and why she kept dating the same kind of man in different fonts. During breaks, they hovered around the speakers like moths to a very expensive flame, asking personal questions, taking notes. One of them actually cried quietly in the kitchen while nodding along to something a therapist said about unmet needs. Susan watched all of this in silence. Not defensive, not smug, thoughtful. By the end of the night, the energy had shifted completely. No one was diagnosing anyone. No one was labeling villains. People were tired in that good way. The kind where your brain has been fed properly. When the night finally wound down, it didn't end with dramatic statements or awkward goodbyes. It ended quietly, which, in hindsight, was the biggest victory of all. One by one, Susan's friends started gathering their coats near the door. They moved slower than when they'd arrived. Their voices were softer. Each of them looked like they were carrying a thought that had weight to it, the kind you don't drop casually into a group chat. Megan hugged Susan first, then turned to me. "Thank you," she said. "Seriously, that was really well done." Tasha nodded. "Yeah, you put a lot of thought into this. It showed." Brielle smiled in that slightly embarrassed way people do when they realize they misjudge someone. "I didn't expect tonight to be like that," she said, in a good way. Compliments, genuine ones, no irony, no backhanded tone. As the door closed behind them, I stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet of the house settle back into place. Susan leaned against the wall, exhaled, and laughed softly. "Well," she said, "that wasn't what anyone expected." I smiled, but inside I knew something important had shifted. Not magically, not permanently, but enough. I'd aimed carefully, and for once, I'd hit exactly where I needed to. The months that followed didn't turn us into some Instagram perfect couple. We still argued sometimes, but these were good and sincere arguments. However, we began to understand each other better and became softer and more sensitive in our relationships. Susan stopped outsourcing her voice. She still talked to her friends, but the advice stopped coming in absolutes. The labels faded. The urgency cooled. Therapy continued, not as a battlefield, but as maintenance. 6 months after that night, Susan sat across from me at the kitchen table, holding a small white stick with 2 lines on it. Her hands were shaking. We laughed. We cried. We sat in stunned silence for a long time. She was pregnant. Somewhere in that moment, I realized how close we'd come to losing all of this. Not because of infidelity or cruelty, but because of fear amplified by too many voices speaking at once. As for the friends, something unexpected happened there too. They stopped giving advice, not overnight, but noticeably. Megan started focusing on her marriage instead of narrating it. Tasha entered a relationship and didn't diagnose it to death. Brielle slowed down, dated differently, and once admitted, "I think I was projecting more than I realized." They didn't disappear, they evolved. And occasionally, in moments that still make me smile, one of them would ask me something like, "Hey Patrick, can I get your take on this?" Not because I was right about everything, but because I listened without turning life into a courtroom. Life didn't become perfect. It became real again. Looking back, I know this story could have ended in divorce papers and separate property. Plenty of people told me I should have walked away. Maybe they're right for their lives, but I loved my wife. I didn't want to win. I wanted to understand her and help her find her own footing again. I've learned something through all of this. A lot of people are hurting right now. A lot of women are being handed bad maps by people who are lost themselves. And when that happens, anger feels easier than patience. But sometimes, the strongest move isn't walking away. Sometimes, it's staying calm, staying kind, and refusing to become the villain in someone else's story. That choice saved my marriage. And now, as I sit here writing this with Susan asleep on the couch, and our future kicking quietly into place, I'm grateful I didn't give up when things got loud. Sometimes, love doesn't need a fight. It needs clarity. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.